to another episode of A Podcast. Your host, Stephen Maxted, and today we have the lovely Cindy Chang, founder of Evolve Consulting Company. And thank you so much for making time. It was great to connect with you. We already have a lot in common, including our birth date, which I thought was really funny. So yeah, a lot of great positive energy on the call. I'm excited to get into it today as we've been kind of building up before recording today, Cindy. So thanks for making time in your busy schedule to be on the podcast. And yeah, we're looking forward to diving in a little bit more with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Do a little intro of you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. I was really looking forward to our conversation. As you know, you stated, we do have a lot in common, and as we kind of joke on the side, we're practically twins. So, yeah. So I am the founder of Evolve Consulting Co., which is a staffing company based out of Toronto, Canada, and I'd like to position myself not as a talent recruiter, but more as a talent partner. And so, a lot of businesses now, especially after the recession, they're dealing with a lot of, what's the right staffing? How do I engage my staff? How do I build up my team? I work with everyone from big companies all the way to small companies who, like entrepreneurs are a great market for me because I'm passionate about new entrepreneurs, me being one myself. But also you have entrepreneurs that step into their role and they're like, okay, I'm ready to hire a team. And they hire their first position and jam like 7 different roles into that one job description, right? And so my job is to really advise companies on, how to make the right hires, how to organizationally, create the right path for your company to grow, to strategically grow and to really kind of help companies in making the right decisions. It's all about hiring, fast and hiring smart and failing fast too. And we're not afraid of that, right? So I also like to kind of define myself as a multi-passionate entrepreneur. So with Evolve Consulting Co., that's my main gig. But on the side, and this is how you and I connected, I also have a podcast as well called Fearless Entrepreneurs, where I interview Canadian entrepreneurs and really kind of get to know the person behind the brand. And I think that's where you and I really kind of connected. I thought what you did was really interesting, with your brands and how you kind of really grew yourself. We had a great conversation there. And part of my passion groups is I also work for a charity part-time called Dare to Be Youth here in Ontario. And that supports youth between the ages of 14 to 24, just helping them with career decisions, like the grade 12 heading into university, being like, I don't know what to do. Now I got to go to university, but I don't know what path to take. As a recruiter or as a talent partner, I have access to a lot of that information. So part of my passion is to help youth through that journey.
Awesome. And that is definitely a tricky time, maybe an overshare here, but I remember at the time of like going into university, I was working like kind of already started an entrepreneurial job on my end of things, like cutting lawns, doing this landscape thing. And then it was like a lot of very positive pressure from my parents to, to go to university. That's smart to do. And it was a overall great experience to do that. But I think you get lost in like, there's a lot of things that you can do, especially like if your grades are okay, you can kind of take things in a few different paths, and it's kind of tough to make decisions on, hey, like what is right for me? You're so young and you don't really realize it at the time. You think that you got it all kind of figured out. If I'm thinking back to that mindset, I'm sure that's super relatable to the folks that you work with, right?
Same. And me too, right? Like in grade 12, it's like, you're about to graduate school and you're being told what you need to do versus like what you're actually passionate about. And people kind of get lost in that journey and it's super, super overwhelming, right? Or they'll like glamorize, a career. They'll be like, oh, I really want to be in marketing. And a lot of young people I talk to, I'm like, well, are you interested in data? Are you interested in reporting? Are you interested in driving trends? Are you passionate about, consumer behavior? Because that's really what marketing is, right? But they see like almost influencer marketing as what marketing is, and that's not the reality, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. We work in that space a bit on the marketing front. Now, can we jump to talk podcasting for a sec? What got you started on the podcast side of things for you? What piqued your interest to do that alongside your business?
Yeah. So, it was really weird. Woke up in April one day and, I have had Evolve for about 5, 6 years now, but it's always been kind of a side hustle. And in January, I really turned it into a full-time hustle or a full-time job or my career. And in April, I just woke up one day and it was like the weirdest thing. I had this dream that I needed to do a podcast. I knew the name of it. I knew what the content was going to be. I knew who I was. I had like my first 10 lineup already lined up in my head. I had the logo. I created the Instagram page. I created the domain. Like it was just so clear to me. And I think one of the reasons why I had started it was just because I've always been really fascinated in hearing and learning about other people's stories, right? I think that, it's what really connects us all. And as I look in the marketplace, there are a lot of different business podcasts that kind of talked about the strategies of business and how to get into business and the pitfalls of business. But do we ever really take a moment to get to know the person behind the brand and, what really made them who they are and what really inspired them to create their brand, right? And so I really wanted to do that, and I was really passionate about it. And within a week, I built this podcast studio. I had
Yeah,
got
it's a space. Yeah.
yeah. Who needs a guest bedroom, right? Like we don't need like.
Same. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Do you did the same thing too?
Yeah, well, I mean, like the office only needed so much space. Realistically, there could be room for like someone to stay over here, but there's no, it's now a podcast studio basically.
Yeah.
So
Seat
yeah,
twins, right? And
yeah,
so I was like, who
yeah,
needs a guest bedroom? Let's turn it into a podcast studio here at home. And
nice,
off we went.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. How did you find that like the solving for the problem, setting up the podcast and everything? How big was that learning curve for you when
Oh
you got
my
started?
gosh. It was huge. I don't know about your experience, but mine was just really like doing a lot of, Google research, connecting with wonderful people like you who are just like so willing to help out. But the learning curve was huge because I'm not a big technology person. I can talk. That was the only thing I had in my wheelhouse that I could use. But like the technology piece was really overwhelming, the setting it up, how to record it, how to get it on the air, how do you get distributed, like it was just like I had to learn everything from scratch, right? So it really was a combination between my husband, who really helped me on the tech side because he is much more techie than I am,
Yeah,
and also wonderful, like podcasters like yourself and others that have really jumped in to be like, what do you need and how can I help you? And that's the wonderful thing I love about community, whether it's an entrepreneur community or podcast community, is how helpful everyone is. Everyone is so willing to just like throw any and every bit of information at you just to make sure that you're not, struggling in isolation. And I really appreciated that.
that is awesome. I know I would totally agree too. Other folks that were kind of ahead of me on the journey, as I just kind of got started, I was like a bull in a china shop, just or
Yeah.
set things up, like record the first 9 episodes, whatever, and kind of like get going on it just to figure out how to make podcasts was our thing originally, and then it kind of just like kept going. But I think that journey
Yeah.
is we didn't have it all, obviously not figured out. Had never done one before. Between
Yeah.
figuring out the back end on the tech stuff, just kind of slow and steady, and figuring out what improvements needed to be made, a little bit of equipment updates, but being within certain budgets because we're not massive yet and not like a full blown studio. But you can see the
Mhm.
progression happening over time, heading that way. If we
Yeah.
wanted it to be like that, wonderful.
Yeah.
But no, that's awesome to hear, and it's cool that you just had this like very clear vision, basically.
It
I'm
was
a big
weird.
yeah, but it's cool though. I don't know if I've had moments like that though, for sure, where just taking that extra time to step away from the desk, so to say, go for that walk or have a really good sleep, and wake
Mm.
up with this like very clear vision of what you want things to look like. Sometimes that
Yeah.
step away from the desk is have also often heard folks joke about the fact that like big creative decisions are not made in boardrooms.
Yeah.
That's
It's
where
very true.
a lot of creativity goes to die in many
Mine's
cases.
like mine's in the shower or when I'm driving.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
everyone's
always
got
like,
this thing,
"Where is
right?
my notebook?" Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, whether you exercise or in those just those downtimes where you're totally solo is really where a lot of that comes from. Sometimes I find
Yeah,
I have to remind myself to like go for that walk or whatever it is, like uh just to have that point of clarity instead of trying to like force something out or just block some time to be open. And then
totally.
stuff comes to you when you're like, oh, okay, like there's no stress. There whatever's going on is
Yeah,
fine. It's just like that. It does seem to solve or self-resolve in a way,
yeah.
on that end of things. So that's super
And
cool.
I totally feel you there because, I think that there's something in the magic of, you know, you have to kind of take a step back in order for the magic to happen. Whereas
Yeah.
sometimes, we push so hard for answers and we're like, what is this? What do I define this? How can I define this? But sometimes it really just takes time and it's born from silence, which is why it's so important, you know?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. Now if we were to I kinda switch gears back to, the
Shut
consulting
up.
business that you do. Let's go back to that for a sec. But so you've been doing this for about, like, 5, 6 years. How did that first
Mhm.
start for you, in this particular part of your entrepreneurial journey?
So that's an interesting story because, I've been in corporate for a big, long time in my career without really dating myself. I'm an ex corporate gal for about 20 years. I have a background in sales, in marketing, in PR, in communications, in recruitment, whatever it is in corporate. I've done a little bit of it my entire career, right? And
Right.
so, about 5, 6 years ago when, I had kinda taken a step back in my career to kinda reassess what I wanted to do. I was also in the place where I wanted to start a family as well, and as you climb that corporate ladder, I always say, "More money, more problems," and so I wanted to take a step back and really kinda reassess what I wanted to do. And in that stepping back, I actually had clients come to me and say, "Hey, you know what? I really need help with my business. Can you help us strategize? Can you help us plan? Can you help us essentially make money?" That's what I knew how to do the best, how to make money, right?
Nice.
And so I remember I signed on my first client about 6 years ago without having a business name, without having how they were going to pay me, without having like any of the business tools that I needed to bring on a client, but I was like, "Yeah, sure, let me bring you on," right? And that's how Evolve started, was just because I had the bandwidth to kind of help some people through referral only. And so I never promoted my business for about 5 or 6 years because it was always a side hustle, right? And
Right.
then about 2 years ago, 2 years ago now, last year, it's all a blur, I had, been in a company that I was with before, and they were, had just done lots of layoffs. They, were moving in a different direction. And it was weird because intuitively in my head, I was like, okay, I'm going to search for another job. I have Evolve that's kind of like keeping me afloat on the side, but I'll just look for another, job with benefits and with stable pay. But I wanted to be really selective because coming out of COVID, the landscape of work had really changed, right? And
Totally.
so I had, in my search, like I was rigorously searching for another job, trying to find that right next position. Meanwhile, Evolve was kind of like baking in the background. I guess this was last year. We're only in 2024. I've only had my business now for like up and running for 1 full year. But
Yeah.
last year I had so in my search for my full-time job, I ended up making more money in Evolve than I would have if I were to been with another company. So at the end of 2023, I had an identity crisis and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, am I leaving corporate, that stable paycheck, that
Yeah.
benefits package, the bells and the whistles, coworkers. I'm an extrovert. I love like, socializing with people, to working completely on my own." And then I made that decision in January to really go for it, right? And it's honestly the best thing that I've ever done. It's so rewarding, and I get to exercise my creativity and my vision. And I don't know if you feel like this, but it's just I wake up every day amped about what I want to achieve and what I want to do.
That's awesome to hear. Most days. I'll say 90-10. Some days are a
That's
little like,
true. There are bad moments too, hey?
yeah, if I'm being fully transparent on my end, there is some days where I have doubts. I'm like, oh, like even when people sometimes ask me, it even happened this week. They're like, hey, like I have this idea, blah blah blah. I want to do a business. I'm like, keep your job, flat out. But I'm like, but I'm also super optimistic to be like, if you're gonna do it, just know like it runs some risks because I think you could be really
Yes,
successful. But you're leaving a lot of comfort and stability from where you're at. You have a good job in this case. Like,
it's
is it
true.
worth the change kind of thing? Like, be real. Like, if because I find it's like definitely a consistency thing over time, right? Regardless of what
Yes.
you're doing, and if you have that marathon mentality of like really like hammering through and like success is the only option through here,
Yeah.
to a point. There is, I
Yeah.
think, some flips on that where you can start again
Yeah.
if things don't go because business is not perfect. There's a lot of moving parts. There's other people.
Absolutely.
Even if you're working alone,
Yeah.
there's other companies and they can have their failures, which can affect you. A lot of stuff that can be out of your control. But
Mhm.
I do really like what I do, and I would be very tricky to go back and work for someone. It'd have to be kind of your point, like I think you were kind of heading this way. It would have to be like a really great situation.
Yeah,
I'd be a little bit more picky, I think, about that.
for
Like,
sure.
it'd be tough. But
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, which is, it's definitely not all sunshines, rainbows, and roses. There are within this year, I would say, in my growth, there are a lot of dark periods too, right? Like you go through like the first real like hurdle was imposter syndrome, right? Like, am I doing the right thing? Am I bringing the right, value to people? How can I just help people? How can I charge people? How can I price it right? And then you go through lulls, and sometimes those lulls are really hard because you're like, oh my God, I'm not producing. What does success look like to me? Am I failing? And like one of my biggest fears is fear of failure, right? And so not letting myself fail was a really hard pill to swallow, but sometimes you just gotta fail in order to learn, right?
you know what? That's a really interesting point about how do you manage that feeling of imposter syndrome?
Um, I I I don't know if you're like this. I would imagine you are because we're twins, right?
Obviously, yeah, we're quite.
So I think imposter syndrome for me was really at the beginning, and it's less more so now. And how I kind of help myself combat that, being a newer entrepreneur is that I just surround myself with really rooted people and I do a lot of networking because I
Yeah,
think there's power in not feeling alone in your like in your journey to
yeah,
entrepreneurship. And when you're networking, you realize everyone feels the same way, right?
yeah,
And every guest that I've had on my podcast have been, small, family, mom and pop shops, all the way through to pretty large, successful businesses. At some point, everybody has gone through imposter syndrome, right? And so I think just normalizing the fact that it's a real thing and it's normal, and as long as you're there for the right intentions for people and for your clients, that it's okay to make mistakes.
I totally agree. I think that going to some of these like networking events, and I was at, we usually go to this one on like Thursday nights, like locally here. But there's events like every night. It's like they should
Yeah,
really have one night. So we're not,
all of
good
it to one
planning.
place. Yeah.
Yeah, but either way, I joke with some of the entrepreneurs there, and if they listen to this episode, they're gonna be like, "Steve does say this," but low key, it feels like like business therapy by going
Yeah.
to those events and just chatting with other entrepreneurs, like you said too. Like if you are the one leading out on their journey, or you're part of a startup within there, there's a lot of great sharing that can be had with
Mhm.
spaces to realize that you're not alone, and that just because you're doing something for the first time, like those little or those seemingly like very large things become actually
Mhm.
not that big of a deal over time. You look back and you're like, oh, whatever, like
Totally.
that thing happened. Oh, like again, like I know how to
Yeah.
manage people. It's just being realistic about, okay, like I'm still new to this game kind of thing
Yeah.
and figuring
Yeah.
the rules. It's like an ongoing board game. but it's evolving too in a lot of ways. So
Totally.
yeah,
Totally, and it kind of feels like a puzzle piece that just never, sometimes it doesn't fit right, and that's okay, right? And I guess, it just really kind of shaping the ability or the comfort in just, you know, things not being perfect, right? Like I
yeah,
mess up. I'm probably the one to mess up the most, but I'll be the first one to admit it to my clients, right? I'll be like, "Hey, you know what? This happened, but we're here to rectify it and we're here together." And I've been pretty lucky in my journey. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, I have been lucky enough to be able to choose the clients that I take on. And if any clients
yeah,
gives me that gut feeling, or any podcast guest that gives me that gut feeling that, just makes me feel icky. I just don't gravitate towards that, right? And it's the same thing with clients. Like if they are going to be energy vampires and they suck all the living force out of me, like I'd rather not take them on. And so the clients that I do have on board, they're super aligned with my values, and that we're all human, and that we're all parents, and that we're all, trying to just survive post pandemic. And
totally.
and it's okay to fuck up. Can I swear on the show?
Yeah, we can share. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's there. Yeah, yeah. We dropped it. It's in there. We always check the not for kids thing on YouTube.
Good, good.
No, no, I think that's great, and it's actually super aligned. I didn't know that before the
What's
episode, but
that?
I didn't know that that's how you kind of went through managing your business. But we would be very similar on that one too. Is just kind
Twins.
of yeah, again, really twinning all episode. There's just yeah that reality of like, and it's probably like an experience thing too. I like having about like a decade in corporate ag stuff, and then moving into transitioning out of those jobs into your own thing, like 100% for myself. I think having some of those other, I'm sure you've had those corporate experiences too, that led you to be a little bit more picky about clients later on, just
Yeah.
because you've had those experiences where maybe you'd had to put on the really good face for a situation that you didn't want to necessarily. I know I
Mhm.
experience there for sure, and then it just led to a very different approach to business where, I mean, for us, we do, I don't want to get like too confident here. Maybe we do in the future have to do advertisements to help draw people in, but a lot of time it is like
Mhm.
referral and long-term clients in our space.
Mhm.
So yeah, we're more picking up the phone to contact people and be like, we'd like to work with you. And hopefully
Yeah.
that way. It's kind of neat. Because then we end up having like a good, really great yeah, relationship within that environment. And yeah, finding that alignment. It's something that I think about quite a bit actually in terms of
Yeah.
like kind of, we'll say, like competition. I don't really see
Mhm.
it that way because I
Me
feel like there's other people that like align better with certain companies. There's no
Yeah.
knock. There's so much available out there, and I think understanding that more internally makes your company healthier. Ultimately, we also yeah. So that whole segue of stuff definitely align there. Same with yeah the
Yeah.
podcast and stuff. You just kind of know, and I think that's a big thing. The nuances of business, like trusting your gut initially. I don't know when there is. Sometimes I like even go into business relationships. I write it down on my whiteboard all the time. It might even be here without getting too distracted. But like go
Yeah.
slow. It's like move slower. Like I move pretty fast on some stuff. If we're like, hey, let's go.
I get
That's
it.
we want to be there and helping these people, but like let's make sure that we are taking those steps ahead of time before we are
Mhm.
yeah, invested together on a project. And I think
Yeah.
another point, you might come across this too, but it's way better to have that really strong relationship within the business environment and or like personal too. But like when things get rocky, you want to have someone that's going to be on your team together. Because like I
Mhm.
said, things happen. Like we've experienced that with some of our like clients before, and they're still with us. Like we've worked through some issues. Like other companies are, and sometimes it's like a growth issue. Like it's like a
Yeah.
positive thing, but it's still something that we need to like work through with them.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't change how we do that now, because with someone who you don't have that big of a connection with, you run into bigger problems. They'll just like kind of, the communication is my first indicator, kind of like ghosting. It seems to
Yeah.
drop off when there's like an issue, and I'm like, let's just talk about it, because like I don't want to like be in this like lull of like not knowing what's kind of going on. It's better for both of us if we are aware, and then I think that the only way that happens is by having a good relationship with them ultimately. But
It's kind of like dating, hey? Like, as I'm just hearing you talk right now, I'm like, oh my God, the ghosting, like the communication is most important. Like, it
yes,
really parallels to dating. And I think you're right. Like, as
yeah,
we build experience in corporate and, had our hearts broken 5 bajillion times, like,
yes,
maybe that's all
legit.
related in how we create boundaries and how we make rules for ourselves and how to move forward. Like, I think that's so insightful?
Yeah, I think it is definitely like that too. And sometimes, like, there's other games that are kind of played, I think, within the environment of business sometimes, but they really probably don't need to be. There's a
Yeah.
like, yeah, business out
That's
there
my
where like,
number one rule. Like, I just don't play games. Like, I'm
yeah,
very straight up in business, in relationships. Like, I've never, well, that's not true. I have been a game player in my early 20s, but like, I think
yeah, that's how you know. That's how you have life experiences.
that's
So
how you learn, right? But like, I think the work world is really changing, and I
yeah,
think people appreciate transparency, and I think people
totally.
appreciate honesty even if it's not what people want to hear. I think that people are changing, right? And I kind of dig it. Like, I'm not apologetic when I make mistakes, and I'm not apologetic when I have to be a mom, and I'm not apologetic for, wanting to take my business in a certain way. Like, I refuse to apologize for it now.
Yeah, no, I think you totally nailed it too. And maybe I'll ask you, like, what is the feel of the environment for like the hiring and in your role there with companies nowadays? Like, what are some trends that you're seeing in terms of how they are managing that relationship or communication with
Yeah.
their potential employees? Because it's equally probably tough. I hear about people applying like lots of jobs, but also people are having a hard time finding good people, and it's just
Yeah.
this balance beam of like both sides having a hard time.
Yeah. The climate is messed up right now, right? And it's funny that you say that because I just did a post on my Instagram yesterday and my LinkedIn where we're at a point right now where there's a great divide, right? There's a great divide between employers and employees. And I hear it all the time. Based on the nature of my work, I have a lot of people who are great employees who are just so miserable. We're at an all time high with disengagement, dissatisfaction at work. It's just people are not feeling invested in their jobs, and they're not feeling purposeful in what it is they're accomplishing at work. And on
Mm,
the opposite side, I work with a ton of companies that are going through a really tough time right now. We are in a recession. That's the reality of it. Purse strings are tightening, and people just don't have the budget to hire freely. They're kind of jamming more roles into one person, and that's also not helping the morale of employees being happy at work. And you're seeing that divide just get larger and larger on a daily basis. And the biggest topic is like, why are they making me go back to the office? Why is there a mandate? It's all about mandates of bringing people back in, right?
yeah.
And I think the pandemic, one of the good things about the pandemic is that it really forced us to redefine how we think about work, right?
Mm,
And so this year has been a unusually tough year for companies hiring because we're in the recession. I don't blame you
yeah.
if you're not high, like, if you're not spending the majority of your budget on headcount, right? And at the same time, people are, like I tell people all the time, I'm like, now it's a strategic time. If you're a person looking for a job, it's a strategic time to upskill, right? Take the
Mhm.
job, take a look at the jobs that you do see that you want to go towards and upskill towards that. But don't just go up and leave your job because it's reactive, and you always want to plan strategically. And for companies, I always tell them, we have to, and this is why, they should use recruiters or staffing professionals, is like, you should skinny down your staff because at the end of the day, if you burn through your budget, you're not going to have a company. So how can you skinny down your budget? How can you skinny down your budget? A lot of that is cutting headcount. And if so, how do you streamline roles so it makes sense rather than jamming like accounting with HR where it doesn't make sense, right? And then you burn people out, you lose on morale. So if you're saving $100,000 on one salary, maybe we could invest 30,000 of that into a employee wellness program. You're still kind of saving some money, but you have to plan strategically on also how to take care of your staff to make them more engaged too, right? And I feel like because there's this big divide, companies are just so afraid to ask people like, how are you doing? Like, how are you feeling? Right? And maybe that's
Yeah.
just a simple question that people can ask to just feel like human again, you know?
Yes. Totally agree. I think even from like years ago too, like in corporate, like there was, um, yeah, a good sense of check-in periodically, but a lot of the time
Mm,
in the like the just the roles that I personally had, I can speak from, but a lot of the
yeah.
time it felt like you're on an island anyways. Like it was like a territory sales rep for, companies and stuff. And it's like
Mhm.
you're definitely riding that out solo. And that like I was gonna say like one thing that I do like find is like kind of a miss sometimes, even though we have a team like a smaller team. But in terms of like if you're the one, sailing the boat, yeah, like who are you talking to about your stuff? Ultimately, because
Yeah,
sometimes like you second guess, you're like, okay, what do we do today? Um,
totally.
and it's definitely equally tough if you're working within an organization. You got to make those tough calls around people because you do get to know them personally. And I know that everyone's like, oh,
Mhm.
work and personal. I'm like, it's not really like
Yeah.
that anymore. It doesn't seem that way anymore now. It seems like the ones that are really like dialed in and giving. I've heard of companies like putting in, you mentioned like being a mom and stuff, and having companies that do have like childcare like on site or
Mhm.
really close to their work seem to be having like huge advantages. I don't know that to be totally true. Someone just mentioned it to me the other day. I've done no research on this, but things like
Uh,
that, right? To make like the improvement or like your lifestyle a little better or easier to manage, that drop off or pickup, whatever that is. Like that's a huge thing. I would
yeah.
so I feel like that rumor or whatever I heard is true. From
You're absolutely right. Like, I think that, not all companies can afford to just like put daycare in. And let me tell you, as a parent, it is impossible to get daycare for your kids, right? Like, my daughter is 5 now, she's in kindergarten, and I'm still on the waiting list for her after school program that I put her on the wait list 3 years ago. Like, it's insane, right? And so
yeah,
childcare is definitely a problem, like a very, very bad problem for, like Canadians. It's very, very hard. But something that you brought up that I find is very interesting, and that's also my other, my big movement that I'm gonna be going full force in 2025 is one of the groups that I am super, super passionate about is stay-at-home moms, right? I
yeah,
think they are the most underutilized workforces we have. They're smart, they're educated, they typically come from corporate, and they've been pushed out of the work world because all they need is flexibility, right? They just
yeah,
want to be able to drop off their kids, they just want to be able to pick up their kids after school, and they just want, like, they can work between like a 9 and a 3. And companies that are kind of set in their ways just aren't willing to create that kind of flexibility for moms. And that's one thing that I am going to disrupt in the next 2 years is really how do we employ
yeah,
stay-at-home moms, because we're saying we have a workforce deficit, but at the same time, what is it, like 60 or 70% of our population are females, right? So how can we
yeah.
make that work?
It's so funny too. Like, trying to think of like the storyline here about how to compare it, but it seems like such a relatable one. Someone I was seeing a number of years ago, like grandparents and stuff like that. I remember them saying like, "Oh, it's too bad we can't order in different food." And it was like the gap in technology or their thought process because like Skip the Dishes and DoorDash had just started, and
Yeah.
it was like, "Well, no, like you totally can." And they're like, "Oh no, there's no way. That's got to be a scam." And I'm like, no, no, no. Like you have the smartphone, like you're so close to the finish line, for like having this problem resolved. And I feel like
Yeah,
that's a relatable example to like that corporate mindset, perhaps at times to be like,
totally.
you have to come to the office, but we have a shortage. And then you're like, actually, we could totally fill with these wonderful people here that are super skilled. And they just
Yeah.
need to, those brains and that thought need to be met somewhere in the middle of that, right? It was one of those situations that I just think was the easiest comparison there, but it's so obvious the answer, right?
100%.
Like you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
just get
and the thing is, like, they're there, right? And they're great at, like, managing little crazy people. They're, like, typically educated, and,
yeah,
like, I just have so many examples of people who want to work and, the cost of living isn't getting cheaper, right? It's
yep,
getting more and more expensive. Like, grapes are what, 5.99 a pound? Like, that's crazy, right? And all they want is just flexibility to be able to work. So I am building it into my own model in my business first, right? I'm going to
mhm,
hire on moms, stay-at-home moms who can help me with the recruitment process. I have been able to put it into a process and a workflow that I can control, right? Because I obviously want the quality for my clients, but also, like, it's something that I want to prove that I can make it work in my company. And then I want other companies to join me because, if you have a role like data entry, like customer service, like receptionist, it
yeah,
doesn't even have to be remote. Like they can go into offices, right?
yeah,
Marketing, people, HR people, like you don't need to have someone there from like 8:30 to 5. And I feel like in a couple of years, that's going to be a thing of the past. And so it
yeah,
started right here.
yeah, absolutely. No, I think this is a great. There's another interesting example I've heard recently too from some companies that basically, and it kind of relates to what we do on like the marketing side of our company, but
Yeah.
it kind of pains me to see some companies fail, and they've been in business for like 35, 40 years. There's like an insolvency company like locally here out of Winnipeg, and just kind of got wind of a couple companies like going under, and they seem, yeah, there's more competition, but
Mhm.
the lack of, I think, I'm relating it to marketing. Maybe there's other operational issues or whatever, but I'm just like,
Yeah.
look at like those companies from what I can see via online or whatever, it just seems like there was a big gap. There was an opportunity at some point to insert that thing. And it's like one of those things, if you don't like evolve, like you can kind of die
Yes.
in that space. And like maybe, that 40-year-old company could still exist if they would have taken that kind of risk. And I think what would
Mhm.
probably happen in this, maybe I'm not wishing failure on anyone on this side, but like the folks that are willing to like try these things out may have more success. And then other people are gonna be like, what are they doing? And then it'll become like a pain point for them that they can't ignore anymore, ultimately. Um,
Totally, totally,
so
right? It's about pivoting. Like you companies need to pivot. I know it's uncomfortable, but people need to do it in order to survive, right? And this like really weird example that I heard of recently here in Ontario is nurses, right? So during the pandemic, there was a big need for nurses, obviously, right? And
Mhm.
so they were burning out nurses by putting them in at all different hours, 14, 15-hour shifts, right? And a lot of these nurses were moms. So they were like, I
Yeah,
can't do that. Like, how am I going to find childcare? Childcare doesn't exist during the pandemic because guess what? Everything is closed, right? So it
yeah,
forced a lot of nurses to leave their full time jobs because there was a lack of flexibility. And then this really smart staffing agency decided to create a roster of nurses to be able um, to be able to rehire them back into the hospital systems, right, at a higher cost fractionally
yes.
just because then now the hospitals have shortages because everyone has quit because they weren't able to provide the flexibility. So why don't you provide the flexibility in the first place? Pay your nurses a little bit more because at a staffing agency you're definitely paying a premium to bring on nurses fractionally, right? So all in all, the same thing is still happening, but it's just happening in a really unnatural and a really expensive way, right? Isn't
It's
that
hard.
weird?
It is, but I kind of get it. It's like one of those things. It's like
You
if you don't invest like on the front end, which is tricky for some people to realize, like they might be avoiding a pain cycle by
Yeah.
ignoring that thing ahead of time versus waiting, it causing a problem, whether we want to like relate this back to health kind of or not, but like by putting off, like not taking care of like fitness a little bit every day, eventually
Mhm.
that's gonna cost you way more down the road, whether you like it or not, or you're running the risk of it costing you a lot more. So you're kind of mitigating your risk by like doing that. But I totally get from like we'll call it the corporate brain of like budget says this, we have to stay in this, like, and you're thinking like, 1 year ahead on budget, whether it be like a corp or
Yeah.
even things like city planning, provincial planning, you see it often where they're fitting things in a little bit more short-sighted in some ways, especially when budgets are tighter. And then, I mean, locally here to Winnipeg, no major knock on the roads, but sometimes we get knocked on our roads, and they'll fix roads for like a year, patch them up or whatever. But then we have frost and some really crazy temperature swings
You have
here.
a lot of frost.
It gets cold. So, there's things like that where like, yeah, they'll, patch the hole for a year, but then, 2 years later, they got to replace like the road. And I don't know there to be a better solution, frankly, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to make like a really grand investment, on one end of things. And it's almost like a pivot earlier on if you're willing to do that, but
Mhm.
it's tough to make that investment sometimes as a company, especially when
But
you're
they're
getting
spending more money
also,
employing the same people, like, it just
I
doesn't make
know.
any sense,
Yeah, and then other
It's
things
crazy.
get better because of it, but I can kinda see it. But that's really cool that that exists now, right? Because
Mhm.
I was gonna say, I think, like, that fractional side of work, I'm glad that you brought up that word, is, like, going to be, I think, definitely a direction that we head with lots of
Yeah.
stuff.
I
It's
do
really
think so too. And I do think that people yearn to be self employed, right? Like, with this economy, everything is really expensive. People just aren't happy at work anymore. And so I do see that there is going to be a big shift in people working for themselves, and whatever that means, then, we'll just batch it up in a staffing agency and resell it back to the companies at a higher cost. Like, that seems to be a model that has worked post pandemic. So let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. Was that something that, like, you would be able to help companies with, I guess, like, down the road? Is that maybe a thing that you'd be able to do?
Yeah, for sure. So that's part of my mission, is really kind of starting with the stay-at-home moms. It's, even happening with people that I know, professionals at an executive level that, are heading up, departments for like big companies that are making like $250,000. And they're like, I would rather just work 3, 4 days a week,
Yeah.
be with my son, and I don't care to make all this money for what, right?
Yeah.
So it's shifting. It's definitely shifting.
Yeah, that's super, and I've definitely heard similar things. People are not down with that anymore. They understand the value of their time way more, even if they are making, yeah, multiple six-figure roles. By managing your own time better, there's that trade-off of stress that comes along with those jobs that, can relate back if I go back to kind of like the health comment again here, but there's a cost to that health, right? And
Yep.
other people get to witness that with other folks, and they kind of realize, hey, this I don't get this time back, especially if
Mhm.
they're raising little minis
Yep.
on their end, right? Like that time is kind of invaluable.
Tiny
So
tyrants, I call them.
anytime, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's so cool that you're going to be able to be working with that. And so, what kind of area would you cover with the business, Cindy? Like, are you based out of Toronto, but where's your geography that you would work with companies?
Yeah, so I work really with companies in Canada and the US primarily.
Mhm.
In my former years, I've done recruitment for Europe, like Germany markets, UK markets, South Africa markets, Mexico markets. The reach is quite extensive, but really, like, North America is a broad enough market, and I like to focus, and something that I think recruitment agencies aren't really tapping into is helping small to medium sized businesses, right? Small to
Yeah,
medium sized businesses, I think, are the most in need for helping organizational staffing, but they may not be able to afford full cycle recruitment, right? And that's just the reality of it. So, who is carving the path, and who is carving the way for small businesses to be able to have access to those services, but also help them grow and build their business. I know a lot of solopreneurs who, they're tired of being solopreneurs. They're like, I don't want
Yeah.
to do everything. I don't want to do my bookkeeping. I don't want to do marketing. I don't want to do, like any of the thing. Like, I just want to focus on my craft and my zone of genius. And so, how can I outsource that? And so, I think, within the staffing world, we have a responsibility to be able to help small businesses grow. Because if you don't help small businesses grow, how are they going to be big businesses down the road? Right.
Do you find a common like time frame for when those solopreneurs get there? That actually kind of gives me anxiety to hear someone like doing it on their own, because I
It's
know
a
that
lot.
well, like I know from other experiences, is one of the first things like we started hiring like very early on.
What was your first hire?
Well, I've done it a couple times, like within other organizations where we've like
Yeah.
had team members and kind of some flexibility to hire like virtual help. So I had
Yeah.
experience doing that um, before, but it was actually related to the podcast. When we started doing this, we hired a video editing person. Shout out to Jeff, and
Nice. He
and it,
emails me.
yeah,
Excellent.
yeah, Jeff said yeah. And the other hire initially, I hired two people at the same time with Shawana, and she is kind of like an admin and everything back end. Like I don't know what we would do without her, even in the beginning and to this date. So they both
Yeah.
helped things off, and now we're up to 7 folks on the team plus myself. But it's you get comfy with it initially, and I think it's like an easy thing to do. Like I'm always encouraging people. I'm like, oh my gosh, hire, and then we work with some good partners too, like a bookkeeper, accountant team that manages a lot of stuff. I'm still responsible for handing that stuff over, right? But
Yeah.
it's hey, like it's not a favorite task of mine. I do not want to do
Sure.
this. It's painful. I don't like. I'm not interested in it at
Me
all.
neither.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So being able to like, yeah, offset that stuff and just have the extra set of hands to know what's going on. Like I'd rather start someone early on fractionally a little bit than get them
Mhm.
exposed to how I work. And hopefully that's like a good part. Hopefully that's working for both sides. We do
Yeah.
check inside out too. This is maybe oversharing, but we do that. And then I'd rather have someone started a little bit. So if we do grow, then we have the ability to like, hey, you're not like a crazy onboarding frantically, like,
Mhm.
we got all these clients. What are we going to do? They're already like used to our systems, processes,
Yeah.
it's how everyone else operates in the team. That's kind of how we had grown early on. It was just like,
Yeah.
hey, try this out, basically test it for, those contracts for a few months with that in mindset. That's how we had done it. I wish more
Yeah.
people would try it out. Maybe not forcing them to do it the same way, but I'm like,
Yeah.
you need help. Like it's not, you can't do all this stuff. When I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh,
I
stress.
think that I
Yeah.
think that's like like you describe what I wish all my clients would, be open to getting out of, that solopreneurship, right? Because at the end of the day, this is how I feel. We all became entrepreneurs because we were good at one thing. We had one thing we were really, really good at. And that doesn't mean that when you signed on the dotted line to be an entrepreneur, you were good at all the things, right? And so how do you stay in your zone of genius with, that one thing that you're really good at, the thing that you get up and you can't wait to do? And what are the things that you just don't ever want to do? Like you put it till the last minute. For me, that's admin work. For you, that's I as a Leo, like I know it's admin work. I know it's
Yes.
paperwork. I know it's getting back to emails. I know it's like reading that email, right? And it's the
Yeah.
detailed things like editing podcasts, all of those things. And so,
Yeah.
that's my biggest piece of advice for, solopreneurs looking to hire is that what is it that you love to do? You keep doing that, right? And then what is it that you don't love to do? And then find partners. Exactly. I think you said it perfectly. Find partners to be able to do it for you on a
Yeah.
fractional basis. It doesn't have to be that you have to hire someone at 50, 60, 70, $80,000 right away, but how do you hire someone on like an hourly basis? And what is that time worth to you? Right. And then once you bring that person on, you trial them. Maybe it's a good fit. Maybe you hire them on full time as your business grows. But I think that's the perfect way to navigate, building a new business is you just focusing on staying in your zone of genius for sure.
And what do you like for other folks that aren't used to this thing? Because well, I'm just going to insert it and I'm just going to go for it. But
Yeah.
I think part of it's like a control thing, right? It's like letting go of like, oh my gosh, like if I'm not doing this, like, and I think it's like a dangerous thing to hear from
Yeah.
some folks. No one else could do this. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
people could. They might even do it better. And I think sometimes,
Totally.
like,
I
or they
mean,
will. probably do
I
it
think
better.
100% of the time, most of the time, other people will do it better, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I say to that is that, I hope that when people say that, because I'm guilty of that too, right? You have like a perfectionist, like, this is the way that I like to do things. This is the way that I like to see things get done. But I hope with entrepreneurs that when they do say that, it doesn't come from a place of ego,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And that, it's not about you needing the control on everything. In fact, if you do something really well and you are able to put that into a process for other people to complete, the thing that I keep reminding myself in my head as an entrepreneur is, how can I delegate eventually all of my tasks, right? Even the things that I love to do, how can I package that up so I can give it to other people, to employ other people, to teach other people, to mentor other people? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to be the person that's doing everything. It's very exhausting. Like, I want to be chilling in a beach somewhere. Like, hopefully, someone can take it over for me, and that's going to be my end goal, right? So, I just, the control thing, I totally get. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you have to work towards putting it in a process where there are checkpoints to be able to keep that level of service that you expect.
Do you find that it's a certain point in someone's journey when they kind of hit that max where they're like, okay, I need
Yeah,
help? Like, is it how many like years or months in, or maybe different for other people, but do you
I
see a
think it's
trend?
different. Yeah, I think it's different for everyone. I think that's a good question. I think it feels like when you're working, like, 17 hours a day, right? When you feel like you're working 17 hours a day, like, that is
Some-
time where you need to start auditing what you need to pass off, right?
oh,
Because that's not healthy for you. That's not good for your business. That's not good for your mental health. That's not even good for your health, right? And
yeah,
so I remember getting to that point where, I had just started, and it was earlier this year, like, it was like 2 months ago, right? I had
yeah.
been running my business, which is recruitment, which is like, reviewing 2 to 300 resumes a week, right? I was doing on average 15 to 20 interviews every single week with people to try to get them out to clients. I was trying to audit to, to different clients of, what to do. I was doing the podcast. I was editing the podcast, all on my own. And it was too much. And so what in my process was I able to offload? And it was editing, and it was sourcing resumes, it was reviewing everything. So it's
Oh,
just, you have to make decisions.
and how did that feel for you after offloading some of that stuff? What is the feeling of, yeah,
Great.
great.
It
Yeah,
feels great, and this is where my idea of, like, employing stay-at-home moms really came from, right? I had always wanted to tie the idea together of, how do I employ stay-at-home moms, right? And this is how you do it, right?
really.
And so I'm fully on my journey. I feel good about it. I feel good about the people that I'm employing. And I want to offer them the flexibility. And some of the people that I work with fractionally now, they'll be like, "Oh my God, my kid is sick this week. Oh my goodness, like, I have this and this to do." And I'm like, that's okay, because life comes first, right? Life
Yeah.
comes first, health comes first, you come first. And if you can't do it, that's fine, because I have a good system in place where then we can pass it off to someone else, and it's okay. Nobody's going to die. I'm not saving the world here.
I no, I really like that approach too, because yeah, I used to talk about in corporate stuff. I mean, we worked in ag, and I mean, as much as things were time constrained and they were important, we were not working in a hospital. Um,
Yeah,
initially there, just to like put it in perspective. Ultimately,
totally.
like, we do everything we can in our control to get product delivered. That was kind of usually the high emotion time of seeding or harvest for different things. Totally get it, but if we take a step back, realistically, we'll get it there. And some things are out of our control.
Yeah,
You just got to roll with that sometimes. So that is
totally.
also from your end of hiring within your own team, sense of relief. Kind of after that, I feel the exact same way. We work with great people too on my team. They're amazing. You just got to, I hope on the other end too, like, it's a mutual thing, but treat them well. Hopefully they
Yeah,
feel good at their jobs. And it's pretty simple. Like we said before, I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's changed a lot though from what it used to be in the work environment. Um,
yeah.
excited to chat uh, more in the future already. I not to cut this off, but Cindy, how do folks find you? Let's say someone hears this episode, here's a short clip. Where's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm pretty active on Instagram. So Evolve Consulting Co. and Fearless Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So you can find me, Cindy Chang, on there. And yeah, I kind of pop up a little bit of everywhere. So you can find me, DM me, chat with me. I'm here to help.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, you know what? Let's call it there, Cindy. This was great having you on today. I think we covered lots, and I really appreciate the dialogue around everything that we covered today. This was really nice to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, anytime. Chat soon.
All right.